you everyone for coming. This is a very, very exciting talk. I myself very much look forward to it. I have read the book and I'm very keen to hear what Peter has to say. So firstly, I will do acknowledge of country, which is custom for organizations in Australia. So the ANU acknowledge the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri people who are the traditional owners of the land upon which the university's Acton campus is located, and also where I'm located here in Canberra, in Belconnen actually. We pay our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, Indigenous peoples, past, present, and future, and acknowledge that this land from which we benefit has an ancient history that is both rich and sacred. So welcome everyone to the Australian Centre on China in the World talk. Here we have a very, very honored guest, Peter Martin, to talk about the book he has published. So first, a little bit about Australian Centre on China in the World. We are committed to pursuing multidisciplinary research that draws on the best traditions of both the humanities and social sciences, and that engage with policy-making community of bureaucrats, diplomats, and politicians who sit on our doorstep in Canberra. We're also committed to sharing the diversity of China-related scholarship at the ANU with the broad public, nationally and internationally. We host seminars and public lectures like this very regularly, so keep an eye on what we have next. Today here we have Peter Martin, who is a Bloomberg's defense policy and intelligence reporter in Washington, D.C., and author of this book, China's Civilian Army, The Making of Wolf Warrior Diplomacy. He was previously based in Beijing, where he wrote extensively on escalating tensions in the US-China relationship and reports from China's border with North Korea and its far western region of Xinjiang. So his writing has been published by outlets, long list of outlets, and he holds degrees from the University of Oxford, Peking University, and the London School of Economics. Very, very accomplished. I can only look up to you and be, I wish I could be like you. So China's wolf warrior diplomats have attracted attention around the world, especially here in Australia, where in December last year, China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson, Jiang, I'm sure we'll hear this name a few times, tweeted a digitally produced image of an Australian soldier holding a knife to an Afghan child's throat. Zhao is a diplomat, well known for his provocative sayings, especially on Twitter. And this tweet in particular prompts strong and immediate reaction from the Australian Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, who held a press conference condemning the tweet. So Peter's book examines Chinese diplomats in much more details and pick at the behaviors behind the facade. So very, very glad to have you here, Peter.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
So Chinese diplomats' behaviors have earned the nickname Wolf Warriors, referencing the 2017 movie, Wolf Warriors. This gives people an impression that it's a rather recent phenomenon, perhaps. So, Peter, when people talk about wolf warrior diplomacy, what do they mean? Is this a new phenomenon?
Yeah, so it refers to these kind of outbursts that Chinese diplomats have made around the world. You know, as you said, there have been kind of provocative comments on Twitter. There have been incidents of Chinese diplomats storming out of international meetings, barging into the offices of the Papua New Guinea foreign minister. They got in a literal fist fight with Taiwanese diplomats in Fiji and gave one Taiwanese diplomat a concussion. They have, told foreign leaders to shut up, spread conspiracy theories about the origins of COVID-19. The list goes on, including, of course, some pretty testy comments in Australia too. But the thing, I guess, is that I started to look at this topic before wolf warrior diplomacy was really a phrase that people were using. And I was interested in this question of like, why does China struggle to communicate with the world? Why does it have a tough time doing that? And I was drawn to Chinese diplomats because they have to, and to me, they were a kind of fascinating set of characters because they have to walk this tightrope between two very, very different worlds. There's kind of a closed, slightly paranoid, very secretive world of Chinese politics. And then there's the kind of more open, but also quite strange, rarefied world of international diplomacy. And they have to be fluent in both and navigate their way between them. And they've had that challenge right from the outset when the Chinese Foreign Ministry was founded in 1949. And the way that China's first, or the People's Republic of China's first foreign minister, Zhou Enlai, kind of devised to overcome that challenge was to model Chinese diplomacy on the People's Liberation Army. He said that Chinese diplomats should think and act like the PLA in civilian clothing, by which he meant they should have kind of unfailing discipline toward the Communist Party. They should display what he called a fighting spirit whenever China's interests were challenged. And so actually, we've seen displays of what we would now call wolf warrior diplomacy right from the outset. In 1950, a group of Chinese diplomats were dispatched to the United Nations in New York. And the kind of lead representative there, a guy called Wu Xiaochuan, this sort of veteran revolutionary, had bullet scar across his face. He delivered a speech which Time magazine described as 2 awful hours of rasping vituperation, which, you know, he kind of made today's wolf warriors look like a bunch of wimps. So, you know, without going on too much, this behavior has very, very deep roots in the Chinese system.
Oh, okay. So it's not just recent. That's very interesting, because a lot of media coverage we have here. We have heard about those newfound wolf warrior diplomats seems to indicate they are recent, but seems to be going back to all the way from the founding of the People's Republic. Now, I'm curious whether you have looked into this, whether, you know, this behavior is unique to China. Do other countries' diplomats act in a similar way?
I mean, I think it is relatively unique. There are kind of sporadic examples you could think of. You know, some Chinese behaviors, like making diplomats move around in pairs, is something that China has in common with North Korea. Ideological outbursts, something that Chinese diplomats have done over the years. Soviet diplomats did that too. Of course, in the Trump administration, several of the political appointees engaged in tactics which I think you could fairly describe as wolf warrior style diplomacy. I think the key difference is that on the whole, it was the political appointees that did that. It wasn't the professional US foreign service. It wasn't the bureaucrats behaving in that way. So maybe that's a bit of a point of contrast. And I think the reason that this keeps happening, and it's not consistent, right? China's had big periods of time where it's engaged in charm offensives, and wolf warrior tactics haven't been very prominent. But the reason it keeps happening is really rooted in China's political system. And of course, in a kind of post-Soviet, post-Cold War world, with a few exceptions on Cuba and elsewhere, China is kind of really alone in having that system, which probably explains some of the distinctiveness of its style of diplomacy.
And that leads on to my next question. You know, in our audience, I can already see that we have quite a few people from the Australian Public Service, including from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. So, you know, from a bureaucrat's perspective, then we want to know a bit more about bureaucratic incentives. So, what are the domestic or internal factors that dictate how Chinese diplomats behave internationally? You know, what bureaucratic pressures are they under to make them behave that way?
Yeah, so I think of I mean, there are a few different things, but you know, China designed its diplomatic system to be incredibly responsive to political changes in Beijing, right? It was designed, although the foreign ministry technically reports to a government body, it doesn't report directly to the Communist Party. In practice, that the loyalty is to the CCP. And so when the leadership changes its priorities in terms of what it wants to accomplish internationally or what it wants to do, Chinese diplomats fall into line very, very quickly behind that. So in the mid-1950s, when the priority was charming the developing world, Chinese diplomats fell into line, and they did an incredibly impressive job at spreading China's influence outside the Soviet bloc. In the 1990s, when the priority was rehabilitating China's image after the Tiananmen massacre. Similarly, Chinese diplomats got on board with that and applied great discipline and skill to that task. When the leadership has changed its focus and is less bothered about outside opinion and more bothered about party building, ideology, cult of personality, political loyalty at home, Chinese diplomats respond in a way where kind of, I think, foreign audiences really take a backseat for them, and they start to focus on how do I keep myself safe by, speaking in a way that is going to make the leadership happy, and also how do I advance my career. So maybe if they hear Xi Jinping making kind of pretty nationalist speeches, perhaps they'll take that same nationalist sentiment and add just a little bit of extra zeal for good measure in the hopes that they might get promoted. And, you mentioned Zhao Lijin, and I think he was really the perfect example of someone who made his name picking a fight on Twitter. And then, it had this effect of really rocketing him up the hierarchy in the foreign ministry. So that's really, really important. I think one extra kind of backdrop to keep in mind is perceptions in the foreign ministry, but also among Chinese leaders of kind of the global balance of forces or balance of power. At times when you think in the Cultural Revolution, the kind of one of the ideological lines was that China was the center of the global proletarian movement. And that kind of influenced this very China-centric view of foreign policy. And I think something that is in the minds of a lot of Chinese political elites at the moment is that the West is in decline, and the US in particular is kind of stymied by its gridlock political system and the rise of populism and those kinds of things. And so any incentive that they might have to moderate their behavior is kind of skewed by those perceptions of the global balance of power, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I guess Chinese bureaucrats, like bureaucrats everywhere, always have an eye on how to advance in their career after all.
Right.
Just a reminder for our audience that we will be opening Q&A to everyone soon. So start thinking about your question now. I know for me, at least, it takes me a few minutes to think up a question. So start thinking now. And just use the Q&A button. And type the questions there, and I will read out the questions without naming who it is, so that in the recording it won't be shown who is answering, who is asking the question, in case you're concerned. So I'll go on to the next question. So that was the internal drive. I'm just wanting to go to the external drivers now. So look at external drivers then. Do you think has the changing geopolitical balance of power then affect how Chinese diplomats operate? Does the fact that China is becoming more powerful change anything then?
Yeah, so I think there's been this kind of steady move towards assertiveness. So from the 2008 global financial crisis was really crucial in terms of persuading not just Chinese diplomats, but Chinese political elites that the West was, its model could be drawn into question, and that maybe China could be more confident in the way it did things, and it didn't need to take lessons from the West anymore. And then, the rise of populism, political gridlock in Europe and the West, and of course the Western response to the coronavirus have all contributed to this kind of general image that, as many foreign policy thinkers in Beijing say, the East is rising and the West is declining. And I think that has had a pretty palpable effect on Xi Jinping, but also Chinese diplomats. I remember talking to a pretty young Chinese diplomat, but who's old enough to remember a decade ago, and I kind of said, so what does it feel like to walk into a room now? Do you feel like China gets more respect? And he said, oh yeah, you can feel from people in the room that there's this new kind of deference to China. And he clearly felt that was a that was a really great feeling. Maybe he
Yeah.
didn't feel respected enough when he was younger, or he didn't feel that people took China seriously, and now he does. And so I think that right from the lower levels of the Chinese Foreign Service all the way through to the office of Xi Jinping, people kind of have this sense of destiny for Chinese power, and that inevitably bleeds into the way that they treat others. The other thing that the kind of piece of evidence for that I would suggest is the differentiated way that China treats Western countries, which I think has a lot to do with how it assesses its power. If you talk to people in Washington, you would kind of get the impression that most of Wolf Warrior diplomacy had been aimed at the United States. You talk to people in Australia or Canada or Britain or France, you would find out very quickly that they're definitely wrong about that. Actually, I think China's tone has been much harsher with kind of smaller powers, middle powers in the West than it has been with the United States. And I think that's because the stakes are so high with the US. It's still the biggest economy in the world with the most powerful military, and there are huge costs associated with getting that relationship wrong in a way that there just aren't if you upset people in the UK or Canada or Australia, I dare to say. So I think that's kind of a proof point as well.
So just follow on that, then, because you mentioned that it's mostly targeted at middle, smaller power in the West. Do they also use that for non-Western powers as well?
It's kind of hard to generalize about developing countries. I think on the whole, the tone has been a little bit softer with developing countries. In Africa, for example, there have been almost no examples of wolf warrior diplomacy. And where there have been cases, it's tended to be kind of inflated rhetoric criticizing the US rather than aimed at criticizing local political elites. But at the height of the virus, Chinese diplomats were engaged in a spat with Bolsonaro's son in Brazil. They told a Venezuelan politician to shut up. There was the fist fight I mentioned in Fiji. There was an incident in Papua New Guinea. So it's by no means, universally true that China goes softer outside of OECD countries, but on the whole, I think it's fair to say that it does.
Yeah. Okay. Just also a reminder for audience, you can start putting your questions now. I will ask the last question before we open up to Q&A. We look at the present, the past. I want to look at the future. What lessons can we learn potentially from China's diplomats? Will the current trend continue? And should other countries such as Australia seek to emulate them?
Yeah. So will it continue? I think yes, with a caveat. So I think that all of the evidence we have, or most of the evidence, suggests that Xi Jinping quite likes the assertive tone. Actually, during the virus outbreak, he sent a handwritten note to the foreign ministry asking them to display more fighting spirit, which suggests that he likes it when China stands up for itself. And you can look at speeches dating all the way back to, I think it was his 2009 speech in Mexico, where he talked about his frustration with foreigners with full bellies who have nothing to do but point fingers at China. So that kind of stridency is very much in line with Xi Jinping's worldview. What I don't think is in line with his worldview is the way that some Chinese diplomats seem to have taken to Twitter to almost freelance Chinese policy. You think about Xi Jinping's, so Zhao Lijian is a great example, right? The most sensitive part of China's foreign policy is relations with the US. It's traditionally, even before Xi, been the sole preserve of the kind of paramount leader and people around the paramount leader. And so the idea that Zhao Lijian, a kind of deputy DG level official, could make up this idea of a conspiracy theory, which my understanding is that he did that without asking anyone's permission, suggesting that the US Army deliberately spread COVID-19 and really injecting a big problem into US-China relations. That seems to me to be very much at odds with Xi Jinping's effort to drive discipline across the Communist Party and to make sure that everyone is singing from the same hymn sheet, whether it's civil society or government organizations or SOEs. So I've kind of long suspected that the wolf warrior tone will continue, but maybe it will continue with a slightly more consistent and professionalized message rather than some of this kind of improvisation that seems to have taken place on Twitter. Although maybe not. Maybe the incentives he's set up for Chinese diplomats to act out, the career incentives are strong enough to override that. I'm not sure. We'll see. There's a study will soon be released from University College Dublin comparing Chinese diplomats' tweets before and after Xi gave a set of remarks to a Politburo study session earlier this summer, where he said that China needed a more lovable image. And so, we'll see from that study whether they actually have moderated their tone or not.
Oh yeah, that will be an interesting study to see. I guess, it's a bit hard to know, whether they received any repercussions internally for what they've done, I guess.
Right.
So thank you. We have some excellent questions already. Do keep them coming, and I will start go down the list of questions. This is a question that I've been wanting to ask as well. The little pinks, the online nationalists. You've always heard this. I'm sure it's a very common story of people mailing calcium tablets to Minister of Foreign Affairs saying that they should grow some backbones. So online, how do you understand the term little pinks? Are they the online younger subset of wolf warriors?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of a fair description. There was this long period of time, like you said, where online opinion and maybe popular opinion in China more broadly, hard to generalize, of course, but the popular opinion seemed to kind of demand this more muscular tone from Chinese diplomacy, and they felt that the kind of softer, ameliorative, charm offensive type tone that they got in the 90s and the 2000s somehow did an injustice to China's role in the world and its prestige. But Chinese diplomats, of course, in behaving like that, had cover from the top leadership, which was stressing harmonious world, Chinese soft power, trying to undo any notion that China was a threat to world peace and those kind of things. And so kind of popular opinion and elite statements on foreign policy were quite different. What I think's happened under Xi Jinping is that there's been this kind of meeting of minds between popular nationalism and the opinions of the Chinese state. If you think about the Global Times, which is a nationalist kind of newspaper in China, and if you had looked at an editorial from the Global Times 10 years ago and compared it with a foreign ministry statement, there was a huge amount of light between them. The foreign ministry would have been much softer. The Global Times would have been railing and calling for all kinds of extreme measures and belligerence. And now, on a pretty standard day, the foreign ministry's opinions and those of the Global Times or online nationalists are pretty similar. And so I think what that's done for Chinese diplomats is to really drive all of the incentives in the direction of just be tough and things will work out for you, because that's what they think is expected of them from Xi Jinping and those around him, and also the Chinese public. I remember talking to a diplomat in Beijing during the height of Trump's trade wars, someone who worked on Chinese trade negotiations, and he said, the only person in a room in Beijing who feels comfortable saying anything remotely dovish is going to be either ministerial level or above, because below that, you're going to worry that you'll be seen as a traitor and you might hurt your career if you say something that's too soft. And so there's this kind of ratchet effect in Chinese politics where Xi sets a tough tone. Online nationalists also expect a tough tone, and anything below that is, you better keep quiet.
I can kind of see a somewhat a similar parallel where, you know, in Australia, sometimes the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade are accused of being too soft and too emphasized on bilateral relationship rather than other government priorities. But of course, you know, usually I think that our online netizens don't really care that much about foreign policy, except for some very vocal ones. And you know, we have the public service list is mostly not a political appointees anyway. So we talked a little before about you know, the bureaucratic incentives and how there's repercussions around the world about, you know, the wolf warrior approach. Are there any signs of recognition of the negative impacts of this approach? If so, what are they? And if not, why not? Surely, you know, there are a lot of smart and the audience, the questions, there are a lot of smart and cosmopolitan people in Waijiaobu who are presumably keeping their heads down for now. What might make this change?
I think that's absolutely true. And that it's important to remember that although China's diplomatic service is quite different to many other countries, the people who join it are still motivated by the idea that there's a value to representing their country, to trying to persuade others, and there's value in talking to others. If they didn't believe that, they would have devoted their lives in some other way to public service, you know, joining the military or the intelligence services or whatever. So they have that in common with other countries' diplomats. And as you said, you know, it's the most highly trained group of diplomats that China's ever had. These are people who speak multiple foreign languages, who have lived overseas for decades in many cases, who have increasing expertise on very kind of micro areas of policy, you know, arms control, climate negotiations, financial regulation. And they want China to have a good and positive image in the world on the whole. But as I said, it's the kind of institutional structures that make that difficult and incentivize behavior in different directions. But if you peek beneath the surface, I think it's quite clear that in the foreign ministry and more broadly across the Chinese sort of foreign policy elite, people in think tanks and universities who are connected to that world are pretty uncomfortable with wolf warrior diplomacy on the whole. And you know, those people don't feel super empowered to speak out. You know, Cui Tiankai, who just left Washington after serving as China's ambassador here, he didn't speak out against wolf warrior diplomacy, but he took issue with some of the specifics of Zhao Lijin's tactics in public. And I think he felt he could do that probably because he was right at the end of his career. He was past retirement age. He was not going to be heading to any other kind of high profile job. And he seemed to have the respect of President Xi, who had kept him in that post for a long, long time. Other people who have spoken out, like Yuan Nansheng, China's former consul general in San Francisco, spoke out against wolf warrior diplomacy. But again, he's retired. Like, there's no career trajectory to upset there. And I think people earlier on in their careers feel a little bit more inhibited. Arguably, the biggest recognition the most important recognition that wolf warrior diplomacy has created a backlash has come from Xi Jinping himself, who, as I said, at this Politburo study session, called for China to create a more lovable image for itself and to win global respect, which I think was kind of a hint that maybe some of these tactics have been counterproductive. But you know, the rub is that Xi's kind of focus was all on telling China's story better and improving the messaging around Chinese foreign policy. But of course, as anyone who's watched China over the last decade knows, that the problem is far more than messaging. You know, how do you come up with messaging that makes the re-education camps in Xinjiang palatable to Western politicians? I think that's extremely difficult. How do you come up with messaging that improves perceptions of Chinese industrial policy when multinational companies are worried about, you know, technology theft and these kinds of things? And you could, the same with militaries and China's around the world and China's policies in the South China Sea and so on and so forth. And there's no sign from President Xi or anyone around him that he intends to moderate the policies that have caused the backlash. And so I don't see, even if there was a shift in the diplomacy, I'm not sure it would do much good at this point.
The next question is interesting. Does the CCP have more respect for strong direct responses from governments rather than appeasement? And that's quite a common questions people ask. We should stand strong against the CCP because they have more respect for such strong responses.
I think the CCP is pretty good at looking beyond rhetoric, whether that is, this isn't necessarily obvious because they can be so, they lash out in public and they behave in these ways that attract a lot of attention. But I think they're pretty good at looking beyond rhetoric, whether that's positive or whether it's negative. I think they do it. Long term, their behavior is shaped much more by their perception of like the domestic resilience of the US, the strength of the NATO alliance, the shape that the Quad grouping of nations is taking, the focus of the Five Eyes intelligence organization, that kind of constellation of forces around China, I think people in Beijing are kind of constantly thinking about and reevaluating, and that has a massive impact on Beijing's behavior, I think. Kurt Campbell on the National Security Council in the US has articulated a view like that it's the task of America to dissuade China of this notion that the West is in terminal decline. And I don't know whether the Biden administration will succeed in doing that, but to me, that would probably be the more important determinant of how to treat China, rather than like, should you choose harsh rhetoric or soft rhetoric? It's about actually changing those perceptions of power that I think would be more important.
Yeah. Now, we have a few questions about how to respond to China's approaches. So I'll read some of them that are kind of related. In this age of strategic ambiguity in the relationship between the superpowers, how should small and medium-sized power like Australia respond to these war diplomacy from China? And there's another one about there's a quote saying that outside the rhetoric, it's hard to see how Australia should have managed it differently. Different rhetoric wouldn't produce a different outcome. The obstacle is an aggressive attempt to expand Xi's authoritarianism into the Indo-Pacific. So what options does Australia then realistically have?
Yeah. So I realized earlier that I didn't answer one of your questions, which is related to this, whether countries should emulate China's wolf warrior diplomacy. And I guess my answer is that if governments care about their global opinion toward them, then they should probably not emulate it. I think it's been pretty counterproductive. The only area where I think you could make a case to say that wolf warrior diplomacy has been successful is that it has sharpened even further clarity about what Beijing's red lines are and what kinds of issues will anger China. But to be honest, I mean, I think they were pretty clear on those issues to start with. So I'm not sure that the wolf warriors have helped that much in that regard. The global opinion knock has been really quite significant. Obviously, declining perceptions of China have come from a variety of sources, including this whole swathe of policies that Xi Jinping has put into practice. But what I think wolf warriors have done is to kind of put a human face on Chinese assertiveness. There was a period where the Chinese military was doing assertive things, and China's external policies were quite assertive, but Chinese diplomats were capable of kind of with a straight face saying, no, nothing's changed, there's nothing to see here. And I think that's become much harder with the wolf warriors. Now there is a human face on that vision of assertiveness, and it looks like the foreign ministry, and that has kind of done damage, I think, to China's global standing. So I don't see how really like I said, the closest parallel to war diplomacy maybe came from some of the Trump political appointees. And I don't think that did global perceptions of the US very much good either. So I wouldn't really see much upside in terms of emulating it. Really, the only way to deal with it, I think, is to get your message across as clearly as possible and kind of not listen too much to that noise or let it distract you, because I think kind of Beijing's diplomats are already helping out Western political elites with some of these displays. And what was the second part of the question? How should Australia behave? I mean, I don't really know, in truth. I think there are people probably on this call who are much better qualified than me to answer that.
If you have suggestions on how Australia should behave, let us know.
I mean, I guess my thought, for what it's worth, would be that in a bilateral context, it's going to be quite hard for countries like Australia to change Beijing's mind. It's going to be all about enlarging the context of bilateral discussions by working with partners and shape, things like the AUKUS deal or the Quad grouping, which Beijing really does take very seriously. Those are the types of things that are going to change Beijing's mind. It's not the kind of carefully chosen comment in a bilateral meeting.
Middle power diplomacy, working with partners. I think that's something that we have always we're always pursuing, and we always recommend people to pursue, countries to pursue. Oh, just another reminder, if you do have questions, put that in Q&A. Do keep those questions flowing. Or like to, I like to have Peter here answer as many questions as possible from you. The next one, interesting, about overseas Chinese community. I guess I am part of the overseas Chinese community. Do you have a sense of how the overseas Chinese community identifies with China's assertive diplomacy, including use of Western social media like Twitter? I actually give a little bit of experience for myself. So I am actively, should I say, engaged in Australia's debate about our relationship with China and things like that. And I get attacked from everywhere, basically, from people who are Chinese nationalists who think that I should be, a bit more considerate about feeling of Chinese people, to people who think that I am too considerate about the feeling of the CCP. But one of the narrative that I personally have encountered is that, now that China is powerful, people takes me more seriously. If China was weaker, then people perhaps wouldn't care what I say. So I think that's a one narrative that's quite interesting and perhaps quite common in China as well. What do you think?
Honestly, I don't think I really know enough about overseas Chinese opinion. I was based in Beijing, where I didn't have a huge amount of access to it. I'm now based in the US, and the only time I've seen it really out in force has been when I've attended important global summits, when it tends to be mobilized by the local Chinese embassy. So I saw that in Buenos Aires for the G20 meeting. I saw it in Palm Beach, Florida, when Xi and Trump met for the first time. And there were busloads of overseas Chinese people, literally busloads, all handed kind of identical T-shirts, flags, little caps, who were bussed in and kind of lined the streets where Xi Jinping's car would go. So I guess I don't know that that's especially useful for anyone except China's state broadcasters, who can pump out those images to audiences back home in China. I don't know that that's super persuasive to other communities, but I guess it does show that the Chinese embassy has, and my understanding is that those things are usually organized through like local chambers of commerce and for overseas Chinese and those kind of things. So the embassy clearly has deep reach into some of those communities, but you know, beyond that, I don't have firsthand experience on it, and it's clearly like a very rich and complicated topic. So I guess I'll leave my comments there before I start making stuff up.
Well, yeah, I guess one thing we all need to remember that overseas Chinese communities for example, in Australia, is extremely diverse. You know, you got the people migrating recently from the People's Republic, you got people migrating from Hong Kong, and previous generations, a lot from, say, Vietnam, Singapore, Malaysia, and then people who have been here for lot of generations. Me personally, I'm a migrant myself, 1.5 generations, so I came here once very young. So all these people have very, very different experiences and different perspectives. And certainly, even when you look at countries such as Singapore or Malaysia, which has a even bigger Chinese population amongst Chinese population in the country, that does not necessarily mean that they have a particular view about the PRC either. So I guess that's something we do need to keep in mind.
I also got the impression, even from those people who showed up wearing identical red t-shirts and caps, that most of them were, I had chatted to some of them, most of them seemed to be along just for kind of the day out. I don't know, I don't even know if they were too bothered about the political backdrop to everything going on.
Oh yeah.
Anyway,
yeah.
sorry.
Of course, some people are nationalists. Some people do feel proud that China has becoming more powerful as well. That's, you know, if Australia becomes more powerful, and some Australians probably will be proud as well. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's malicious either.
Right.
So I guess there's a question about a bit more details about the, I'm not sure if you can answer this, Zhao Lijian's tweet of the doctored image. This audience member said that he or she said that it was a result of considered thinking by the Chinese authorities. And the Australian Prime Minister, you may know that, responded in less than an hour, allowing no time for him to consult widely with key ministers, senior officials, and advisors, his ambassadors to Beijing, or even the opposition leader. So I'm not sure what sort of lesson can you draw from that? Can that tell us anything about the Australian or Chinese approaches to diplomacy?
I don't know the backstory to that particular tweet. I did ask a lot of people about the backstory to the tweet, which I think was in March 2020. You know, the one I mentioned where he said that the US Army had spread COVID-19 in Wuhan. He sent that tweet late at night and without asking any of his superiors in the foreign ministry. So he was kind of acting alone on that one, which is, like I said earlier, really remarkable when you consider the gravity of the situation involved, that the world's two largest economies, the most strategically important relationship in the world, in the middle of a global health crisis. Was a pretty bold thing to do. I honestly don't know how the chain of command worked when it came to the image of the doctored image of the Australian soldier. I think it's fair to say that even if Zhao's tactic with the kind of COVID conspiracy theory tweet went a little bit beyond what was acceptable, generally his tactics have gotten buy-in. After all, they got him promoted to that position. We've seen other Chinese diplomats emulate his tone without very much consequence for themselves. You know, tweets in a kind of similar mold, maybe not quite as provocative, but you know, include images of 19th century slavery in the US, discussion about the rights, I think, of indigenous people in Canada, you know, all kinds of hot button issues. And they've clearly decided that this is an effective way to, I think, deflect criticisms from Beijing about its handling of the virus, about China's political system, about the crackdown in Xinjiang and elsewhere, and also to kind of take the fight directly overseas. And I think some of the thinking from that comes from, and some of the appeal of Twitter and social media in general comes from this deep frustration with what they call China's lack of discourse power. From their perspective, the US and other Western countries have these media outlets at their fingertips that they can just kind of deploy at will. And of course, like I disagree with that assessment as someone who works for a Western media outlet, but that is how a lot of people in Beijing think about it. And they feel like whenever they try to put their message forward, it gets kind of refracted through the biased lens of Western media, and they want to take their message directly to foreign publics, just like populist politicians have turned to Twitter to take their message directly to foreign publics. And so I think that is kind of some of the thinking behind Zhao's actions.
Yeah, I have to say that the media is a whole another huge topic. And people's perception of media as well. Yes, certainly there are people who think that media is controlled by the government, and that's a huge different issue. So I have another question about your process of researching the book. I guess that's more of a question for the academic audience. I understand that you read very widely about memoirs of past diplomats, and you interview a lot of people. I'm just wondering if you could tell us a bit more about the process of this. Did you encounter any obstacles, and how many memoirs did you end up having to read for this? Are they interesting, or are they a bit boring?
Yeah, so two kind of main groups of sources. There were interviews that I was doing. I was working in Beijing as a journalist and often covering foreign ministry events and briefings. And so I'd have as many conversations as I possibly could with people on the Chinese side, whether that was Chinese diplomats or academics or people in think tanks. And, my approach to that is that the best way to have conversations is to ask lots of unthreatening, open-ended questions where you ask people to explain things to you. Like this thing happened, or Xi Jinping said this thing, and why did he say it, and why does he think that? And in my experience, that tends to elicit the best response from interviewees in China, rather than kind of going, why is China cracking down on Xinjiang, and doesn't it respect human rights or whatever? That's not going to elicit a response that's very useful. So interviews with people on the Chinese side, interviews with diplomats who had spent a long time dealing with China over the course of their careers, and then most importantly, this group of memoirs, which I kind of wanted to find a Chinese language source base which would help me get inside kind of the thinking behind some of the public statements that Chinese diplomats made, and like explained where their system came from and what it was motivated by. And so I knew that there were a couple of memoirs written by former Chinese ambassadors and foreign ministers. And so I looked at those first, and then I started using Baidu keyword searches and to every combination I could think of, and just scrolling page after page to find these kind of obscure books. So like China diplomat memoir, China Japan memoir, United Front China memoir, China diplomat recollections, and just every keyword combination I could think of. And I came up with a list of about 100 of them, and kind of just slowly worked my way through them. And they're pretty dull. It's kind of a slog. You don't have to be able to use them. You don't have to read every word from page 1 to page 300 with great dedication. There's a lot you can skip. There are accounts of foreign vacations. There are accounts of meetings and events that just totally mirror the official narrative, and there's no personal take at all. You can skip those. But you're looking for the little details, the little perspectives that kind of shed light on what was it like to be on the front line of Chinese diplomacy. And a lot of that is about looking at stuff that is on the page, and then it's also about thinking about the things that they couldn't put on the page. So in 1989, in the summer, a lot of Chinese diplomats found that they weren't able to go for lunch anymore with people in foreign countries. For some reason, members of Congress in Washington wouldn't meet them, and people in Brussels wouldn't have lunch with them or meet up for coffee or whatever. And of course, the backdrop to that is the Tiananmen massacre. But they're not going to write that. They're just going to write, in the summer of 1989, I found it very difficult to go for lunch with foreign interlocutors. And you have to kind of piece together why that is and what it means. And that just requires a lot of patience and a lot of disparate sources.
Yeah, and a lot of knowledge. Obviously, if it was someone who is not familiar with the field, was trying to just read this and write a book, and they wouldn't necessarily know what happened. So luckily you wrote the book, and you clearly have a lot of knowledge on this issue. So we're just about to come up for time. If you have any lasting questions, please do type furiously and in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to them. Otherwise, question: are you planning a new book?
I don't have a specific project in mind. I absolutely loved writing this one. I thought it was just the most wonderful escape from like daily politics, was to just delve into the history and honestly, like the thing that was really nice about using the memoirs was that I could, I think a lot of the time when we talk about Chinese foreign policy, we view the Chinese state as this kind of monolithic entity, and partly because the Chinese government encourages us to do so, we also think of the Chinese people as a kind of big monolithic entity. And what I really liked about these books was that they gave the chance to kind of really, I could try my best at least to think of things from the Chinese point of view, and like, how does this system make sense if you're in the middle of it? And I just on a personal level, I found that really useful when the foreign ministry was saying these kind of increasingly bizarre things in Beijing, to think about, well, why on a personal level do they want to act like that? So I would love to find another project that kind of allowed me to do that again. I don't know what that will look like, but I definitely know that I want to do it. And I guess I welcome any ideas, actually.
Well, we'll all of us should start thinking, what are the books we want to read?
That's the homework.
Yes. And certainly I am a big fan of the book. I read this, it was easy to read, even if you don't have a background in academia or in China, you can still read it. So that's very important. And certainly our audience member said, based on the quality of the work on the discussion, I hope he writes more. And I cannot agree more. And we are just about to come out for time. So thank you again, Pierre, for coming and talk to us about this book of yours. And I encourage everyone, if you haven't yet, to go out and purchase a copy. They are also available online if you can't get a physical copy. That's how I got mine. It's a very, very wonderful read. It covers history, covers diplomacy, and if you work in Department of Foreign Affairs or any other parts of public service, I think I will say it's essential reading, and it's readable as well. You don't have to be an academic to read it, which is a bonus. So thank you very much for being here and talking to us. I will just have a reminder for everyone for the next event for Australian Centre on China in the World is the annual lecture, which is 30th of November. That is next Tuesday, very soon. The topic is Watchdog or Guard Dog, Australian Media and the China Threat. So yes, we did mention media a little bit in this lecture, and media is playing a huge role right now in the Australia's debate on China. So it'll be a very fascinating topic. It is delivered by Wanning Sun from the University of Technology, Sydney. All right. Thank you everyone for coming, and I hope you all have a good day. Yes, still morning, 11:30.
Thanks for hosting me. I really enjoyed it.